Okay, Umberto echoes Foucault's Pendulum, which is the singular most complex book that I have ever actually finished in my life. For pretty much every reason that a book can be complex, this book is complex, especially considering it is a fiction book, which I'll get into a little bit later. But Eco himself is an Italian author, and he's also a professor of medieval history. And this is an absolute masterclass on an author doing their research, doing their homework, being educated before writing a book. This is one of the most erudite authors and books that I've ever read, ever. So the book follows a kind of triumvirate, trio of characters, and they themselves are kind of overly educated Italian scholars and publishers, and it's their job to basically field authors or authors-to-be, hear out their manuscripts, read the manuscripts, meet with them face-to-face, and then either accept or reject their ideas for books. And just the nature of their publishing company, and for whatever reason, they have a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists or who are super into the secret orders and secret societies throughout history who come in and they want to write these books about the aforementioned conspiracy theories. And so these guys, obviously, through the nature of their work, get very enmeshed with conspiracy theories. And they're also, like I mentioned, very overly educated, in my opinion, about medieval history, ancient history, and the secret societies. And so that just kind of goes hand in hand with the conspiracy theory community, which I'll say for lack of a better word. After a while, they get kind of bored, and they will, for the record, hear these people out. The people will leave, and they'll be like, look at each other. Can you believe this guy believes in this stuff? It's crazy. So they enjoy the conspiracy theories kind of from afar. They realize it's not, true or base reality. Eventually, they get bored with their job. They get bored after seeing the manuscript after manuscript, reading over these things. And so they decide to work together to come up with something called the plan, which is their own conspiracy theory. They kind of just see how gullible the average person is and say, if they're believing this kind of stuff, imagine what we could do with our three minds. We can create something, the most epic conspiracy theory of all time, which is the plan. And the plan centers around the Templar Knights. And a lot of this book goes over the Templar Knights' history, the various important figures in Templar Knights' history. And so their plan revolves around the Templar Knights, and their argument, or at least their alternative history, is about when the Templar Knights were dissolved in whatever year they were dissolved, hundreds of years ago. They were only dissolved, in the surface level of things. They would quit making appearances in society. But really, they took their operation underground. And every 120 years, the leaders of the Templar Knights will meet up in some undisclosed location, and they will reveal essentially one of the 7 seals. And the 7th seal in the timeline of this book in 1988 Italy is about to come to fruition. They're about to have their last meeting. It's the last 120 years. When the reader begins to read about the plan, it doesn't really seem too far-fetched, and it's actually very plausible that, when the Templar Knights were dissolved, of course they still believed in the cause, and they would still have some covert meetings, and they would talk about or maybe plan some things. But as they develop the plan throughout this book, it becomes increasingly far-fetched, and even, the most gullible, or I should say the most open-minded person would be like, this is total BS, no one's going to believe in this. However, because these guys are the authors and the masterminds behind the plan, they get deeper and deeper into actually believing it, which is the central theme of this book, which is the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is kind of something that I don't know if guilty is the right word, but it's a mechanism in my life, and it's probably a mechanism to some extent in everyone's life who's watching this video, the self-fulfilling prophecy that, if you keep saying something's going to happen, or this exists, or something's not going to happen enough times, through sheer, tyranny of will, you incorporate this as a mechanism in your life, and then of course it comes to fruition, at least in your own mind. It does, the self-fulfilling prophecy. And so these guys, they get so involved in making the plan that they start to actually believe in it themselves. Even as the reader becomes detached from the plan, the authors themselves get more and more attached to the plan, and they become more and more unlike those authors-to-be, which, they were smirking at before. Unfortunately, they get involved with some actual secret society believers, and it devolves into some crime. There's some murder. The more they incorporate this idea into their metaphysic, it kind of rots them from the inside out, because the reader knows it's a lie, because at the beginning they admitted it was a lie. They're making all this stuff up. And if you, incorporate lies into your metaphysic, it kind of eats you from the inside out and corrupts you. And there's one passage toward the end of the book where the protagonist, his girlfriend, kind of picks apart the entire plan in one day. And the manuscript on which they built the entire plan, she argues, is just, an old receipt from a merchant trader. which is a pretty funny paragraph to me, because these guys come off as very educated. They are very educated, but they're just very pompous. They think they're better than everybody else. And then the whole plan is basically debunked in one day, because they build the entire plan around a receipt, which is pretty funny. The other central theme of this book, in my opinion, is the interconnectedness of everything, which of course it plays a huge role in conspiracy theories and alternative history and conspiracy theory community, is that everything is kind of related, or at least you can make everything seem related if you want to. So you could of course take one random event through history, let's just say the Templar Knights dissolving, and through enough dot connecting and convincing, you could say, well, you know, we live in a computer simulation. Sounds like a conspiracy theory, because it pretty much is. The interconnectedness of everything. And that's something that Umberto Eco touches in explicitly in this book. One of the characters plays a game where he'll name two objects, and he'll devise a way in which these two objects are related. And so when I mentioned before that this book is very complex, it's complex for a couple reasons. This may not be a parameter for judging complexity, but it is a long book, 600, 700 something pages, which doesn't necessarily mean it's complex, but it does make for a more daunting read. Something that makes it more complex, though, is that we're traveling back and forth through time. Present day, when I say present day, I mean 1988 Italy, which is when this book takes place. We're going from present day to, 50 years ago. Now we're back in present day. And then the next chapter, we may be 500 years ago, and we're in some tent in the desert in Levant. And then the next chapter after that, we're back in present day, but we're in Brazil at some mystic, ritual. All these things, actually happen in this book. And so for a lot of people, myself excluded, it's kind of hard to follow the timeline. But touching back on the connectedness of everything, all these places, all these moments of time, all these settings, and the characters in this book, they all are related, which we find out as we read the book. And I think it's a challenging thing to do as an author, to write about something like that without explicitly touching on it, which of course would make it trite and a boring read. So he kind of tells presents to us the narrative of the interconnectedness of everything without actually saying, look, the Brazil's societies of today are just the same thing as the Rosicrucians from 500 years ago. So that makes it complex. Another thing that makes it complex is the vocabulary. I would definitely have your dictionary ready if you're old-timey, or have Google ready to be looking up some of the words in here. And while Umberto Eco does do a good job of going into the history of some of these characters and societies, some of them he'll mention, like, we're supposed to know what the hell the Assassins of Alamut is from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So I definitely Googled probably, over 100, 200 things when I read this book, which is why it took me probably a month to read this one book. So have your Google and dictionary ready. And it's like I said, this is not necessarily a bad thing that it's complex or that it's super erudite. This definitely appeals to a lot of people. But if you're looking for, if you're used to the young adult fiction, if you're used to going on to the beach and reading a book in one day at the beach, do not read this book. You're not going to like it, and just, stop listening to this YouTube video right now. When I read the description of this book on Goodreads, I thought it was going to be my favorite book ever, my book of the year. It's a better idea than it is a book. It sounds like an awesome idea. The secret orders, the conspiracy theories, taking place in Italy. You have all these settings and scenes, from dive bars to Brazil, mystic ceremonies. But I think all these tangents that Eco goes on about the history of these societies and the people kind of takes away from the book itself. And I get what he's doing. He's trying to make the characters seem pompous. He's trying to make them seem, big-headed. But to me, it takes away from the book. However, it is a piquant book, and it has piqued my interest. A lot of the books I read, I'll think about them for a day or two, I'll do my video, and then it's gone from my memory, basically. I read this book I finished it probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I've thought about it pretty much every day since. So while I don't like the book, I'm probably not going to recommend this to any of my friends or family or anything. It definitely has piqued my interest, and at some point this year, I will be reading The Name of the Rose, which is Eco's other book. So big takeaways from this book: self-fulfilling prophecy, interconnectedness of everything, complex book. I like to think of it as kind of a tapestry, where you look across the tapestry and you see these crazy scenes, these settings, these characters, and you're just like, what is this tapestry? How are these things related? And you take a step back and you realize he has blended them all together perfectly. He's created this beautiful tapestry, which may not be pleasant to the eye, in the sense that like I said, I didn't enjoy it, but I can respect that how he connected all of these seemingly different things and created, this tapestry that is blended together perfectly. If I had scotch, I would be drinking scotch. I would tell you how this book reminds me of scotch, because scotch is complex. You've got the smoky notes, the peat. A lot of them have nuts and, you know, dark, deep chocolates. But I don't like scotch personally. I can respect the art of making scotch. I can respect the complexity of scotch. I don't like scotch. In the same vein that I can respect this book, I don't really like this book. 3.03 out of 5 stars for Foucault's Pendulum. I will say, sick cover though. The golden gilded, you know, echo Foucault's Pendulum, burning at the stake, medieval art, very cool. Definitely putting this in my presentable bookshelf. I read Giuseppe de Lampedusa's The Leopard. I may be doing that next, or I may be doing my first poetry section on Charles Baudelaire. We'll see. Thank you guys, and girls, a tune for your time.